So it's great to be here to talk to you guys today. And the introduction kind of summed up many of the different things I do, which is quite a lot. The last time I actually worked as a barista on bar, being paid to do so, was in the mid-2000s. So it was like right before third wave took place. Last time I was making cappuccinos for people, I was scooping the foam on the cups. So I'm not here to tell you guys necessarily how to make coffee, but because of my different perspectives, mostly as a consumer and being involved in developing brands for coffee companies and different events that are supposed to bring the idea of specialty coffee to the public, I've kind of learned what is successful and what is not in terms of creating a great coffee experience. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a role as a barista that you might not think about that often or have never thought about at all. So I just want to get your mind thinking from a different place as to what you should be doing and what you could be doing other than just making really delicious coffee. So the first brand that I ever developed for coffee was a personal brand. It's called Dear Coffee, I Love You. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek, and the whole idea behind it was that I wanted to share with my friends and family like why I liked coffee so much. So it was about 2007 when I realized that coffee could taste good. All of those years that I made coffee during college, I was the archetype of a terrible barista. People would ask, what's good today? And I would say, it all tastes like dirt. Although looking back at the type of coffee I served, I really wasn't lying to them. But I was the typical just like brooding second wave like asshole barista. And you know, I wanted to be in coffee then because I liked the environment of a cafe, even though I kind of made it more negative. But then in 2007, I learned that coffee could taste good, and I learned to love it. Like all of us probably have our own origin stories of that first cup. And my family and friends thought I was nuts. So Dear Coffee, I Love You was a way for me to take all of the knowledge I was learning and just share it with them. I never expected other people would read it, but ultimately they did, and it led to meeting new people and new opportunities. So then I met some of the guys who we all founded Coffee Common together, and this was about 2010. And I developed a brand for this, and it had its role, but the reason this idea worked had little to do with the brand and everything to do with the people involved. So I went from being someone who had kind of noticed patterns in coffee and wrote about them online to working with some of the biggest names in the industry and learning beside them. So when Coffee Common first started, we were at the TED conference in LA, and then we did an event in New York and in London and TED Global. And all of a sudden, I'm watching baristas like Lynn Butler, Mike Phillips, Stephen Morrissey, Katie Cargiulo, Leila Gambari, Ann Linnell. Like, I'm beside them watching them work and watching them interact with people. And all of these people have done great things in coffee. 6 years ago, they were all still fairly new and young, though. And one of the things that I learned most from them was not how well they could make coffee, but how well they could serve it and interact with people. At the Coffee Common event, they were serving coffee to some pretty high-profile people. Most of them have probably big egos about themselves. And they were serving hundreds and hundreds of coffee a day. And it was all free. But the way that they were empathetic to people's needs and the way that they were able to just share coffee with these people and make them feel happy and unique and that special attention was being paid to them. 6 years later, I still look back at those moments, and those people have continued to inspire me with how good they were working with people. I've also worked with companies like Workshop and G&B in LA and Go Get 'em Tiger and the Nordic Barista Cup. And all of these have become incredibly successful in their own way and right. And as much as I would love to attribute that to my graphic design prowess and the work that I did in helping them develop their brand, the reason they were successful is because of the people behind it and the way that they were able to take the brand vision and kind of bring it to life and fulfill the expectations that the brand laid out. All of the people behind those companies were very particular in how they wanted their coffee presented and how they wanted people to enjoy their coffees. And that's a really big important part of whether somebody will be a customer of yours or not. So I did my master's degree a couple years ago, and it was in business and service design. So the whole purpose of that degree was to look at businesses and apply design principles and figure out how you can make companies better, have better value propositions, work smarter, be more creative. And my master's thesis was on how you could use design-driven service experiences to add value to specialty coffee. So I did a lot of work and a lot of research, and I interviewed a lot of people who have won barista championships and then went on to open their own companies. So I wanted to learn from them about what they learned in the process, and a lot of it was really eye-opening. So after I finished my master's thesis, I was able to start a company of my own, and the idea was to open several cafes. We had an investor. It was going to be fantastic, and I could put all of the things that I studied into practice. But we ended up facing an opposition to our trademark, which tied things up and prevented us from opening retail. And that never got to happen. So for the last 2 years, I've been waiting to kind of put that into practice. Where's this all going? So in the process, we had to rename, we had to rebrand, and I thought a lot about all of the companies I worked with before and what it is that makes me happy about coffee and what makes other people happy about coffee. So actually in 2 weeks, we are renaming and rebranding Supersonic. And this is kind of a sneak peek at the new name. And the idea behind the brand, AKA Coffee, is meeting people where they are. And how every single person, every customer that we serve, coffee's different to them. Some people just want something to wake them up in the morning. Some people want this like mind-blowing culinary experience. And some people just need that habitual cup next to them while they work. And AKA is about how coffee is something different to every person. And we hopefully are able to kind of fulfill that vision by meeting people where they are, not judging them, providing coffee that fits a range of different needs and wants. And that's kind of a summary of what I've learned over the years. So you guys are sitting out there thinking, I'm a barista. Why is this guy up here talking about logos? I need to be working on my latte art and memorizing TDS numbers and all of this. But the reason that I'm talking about it is for 2 reasons. One, hopefully at some point you guys will all get to a point where you either open your own coffee shop or you start your own roastery or you move on someplace. And I want you guys to understand that from the very beginning, you should be thinking about your brand and how you're going to set yourself apart from every other person in this room who wants to do the exact same thing. And the other reasons are because as a barista, one of the things that you're doing is representing the company you work for. So if it's not your company, you are the face that is representing that company. A lot of the customers who come into your coffee bar in your shop, they may never meet the roaster, they may never meet the owner, but they will see you there every single morning. So of course, they want to have tasty coffee, but that's not always why they're coming. And it's not always the most value that you're contributing as a barista. Your value as a barista surpasses making coffee. It's about how you make your customers feel. It's about how welcome they feel in the space. And it's about whether you share the vision of the company in a way that they want to be a part of your tribe and they want to support what you're doing. And your actions as a barista directly influence whether that customer will come back or not. And if your employer is trying to run a sustainable coffee business, that is incredibly important. So these 3 key things I want you to think about as I move forward, that your role as a barista far surpasses just making coffee. And some of you may be beyond this and understand that, but some of you may still be so focused on learning how to make good espresso and good milk that you haven't even let this enter your mind. So I just want to kind of plant the seeds now. But I want to start with just a brief summary of what is a brand. So the term brand comes from an Old Norse word called brandir, which literally means to burn. So back in the early days, it was just marking property or products as your own. So farmers would brand their cattle and entrepreneurs would brand their products just so you could distinguish one from the other. But it's now evolved into something much bigger. Brand now represents this kind of connection of a bunch of intangible things. You've got packaging, logo, name, retail experience, quality, the quality of your product. In coffee, taste, like what profile you're using, hospitality, service, all of these things kind of come together to create the brand. But so what is a brand? It's really intangible. A brand it's more a perception of your business or an organization that kind of exists only in the minds of a customer. And this is where brands get complicated, especially for a barista or anybody really who's representing a brand. Is since a brand is a perception, different people, depending on what they respond to, can have different perceptions of the same brand. So in this room, all of us probably have our own perception of Starbucks. It's probably not the greatest perception, but we all have one collectively. However, Starbucks is vastly successful, and they have loads and loads of loyal customers who have a completely different perception than we do. And what that means is that people are really complicated, and there's no such thing as a universal brand. So when you're creating a brand, you have to figure out who you're trying to reach and make sure those people are happy. Another aspect of brand is what's called brand parity. And this is kind of where we are right now in specialty coffee. And I think it's an important thing that makes the barista's job even more important. So brand parity is when a consumer looks at a range of products and in their mind, they don't see enough significant difference between them to kind of choose. So in their minds, all of the coffee is, or all of the products that they're looking at, there's just minor differences between them. So they're not actually choosing based on quality. And specialty coffee right now is kind of at this point. If you, in the top of your head, like name the top 5 or top 10 roasters in Europe, a lot of them are probably getting their green coffee from the same importers or from the same farms. They're using the same 2 or 3 types of roasters, and the style of roast between them is not that different. And as coffee professionals, we might be able to cup them and taste like, oh, you know, we have a preference. But I think if you had 10 of them on a table, no one in this room could tell which roaster had roast which coffee. And so what that means is that in the eyes of most consumers, they're all the same. So they're choosing their coffee or the cafe that they go to based on other reasons. So I don't have any proof backing this up, but until Matt Perger and Kristen Hinden can scientifically prove me wrong, I'm going to believe it. But I believe that most of our customers cannot tell the difference between us and our immediate competitors. And I'm not talking about like us in Starbucks or us in 7-Eleven. I'm talking about like if you're 5 Elephant or if you're the Barn or if you're some other roaster in Berlin, majority of the customers would not be able to tell the difference in a blind taste test. So what this means is that you need to separate yourself and you need to attract your customers in a completely different way. Because they're no longer looking at the quality of coffee. In their mind, we're all the same. We're all at that highest level. So they're going to choose based on convenience, which cafe is closest to their office or their home, which atmosphere they like more, which one they can set up a laptop and work all day. The service, is it clean? Is getting their coffee fast, or do they have to wait 20 minutes for a pour over? The hospitality, how are they made to feel when they go to a place? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel accepted? Do they feel like their needs are addressed? Or do they feel like they're being judged when they order a certain coffee? Price might be a factor, but I think if they're shopping at specialty shops, like a few cents here and there probably isn't a big deal. But also, I think a lot of our competitors have reached sort of an equilibrium on price as well. There's not that big of a difference. And then brand. Sometimes people don't know about coffee yet. They're still new. So it's like, well, my friend said so-and-so is the best coffee in Berlin, so I'm going to go there. So they pick a brand based on a recommendation, not knowing whether it's actually better or not having yet formed their own perception of that company. So where I feel like the industry is right now is that most baristas have been deeply obsessed with the craft of coffee. And this is not a bad thing. The use of scales in espresso, the use of TDS, for a while we were so focused on pour-overs instead of batch brews. All of these things helped elevate the quality of coffee. And we're all now drinking better coffee than we had been. However, in that process, we forgot a few things. Is that a lot of our customers just enjoy drinking coffee, and they don't care so much about the craft. They don't want to wait 10 minutes for a pour over. They don't want to wait for a siphon. They don't want to wait for all this stuff. They just want delicious coffee. And as a coffee consumer, like I am at a point now where I get that as well. Like I just want good coffee. Like I don't want to know all of the other stuff. And sometimes, if you work in the industry and a barista knows you work in an industry, like they'll pull several shots before you get it, or like, it's just give me coffee. I don't want you to give me a disclaimer that like, oh, the grinder's been off this morning. Like you should serve your coffee with a certain pride and a certain awareness that you're doing good. When I go to restaurants, I've never had a chef or a server bring me food and say, oh, if this isn't that good, the knives haven't been sharpened, or the stove is a little off. Like there is no kind of disclaimer. They serve it very proudly. And I think the baristas should do that a little more as well. So when it comes to deliciousness, I try to think of myself as a consumer in other areas. So with coffee, I of course care about coffee and I want to know about it. But it's because I work in coffee. But I love wine. I love natural wine, to be specific. I know nothing about it. And I don't really want to learn about it either, because most people, most consumers of something, if they don't work in that industry, they don't have the capacity to learn more, or they don't want to make room in their brain for learning something new. I could probably only name a few different regions where the wine that I like comes from. I can barely pronounce or remember the names of the producers. I can remember some of the labels of the ones that taste good, but really, like, I just want tasty wine. I like to drink it, and that's really enough for me. And I think a lot of coffee customers are the same way. Like, they don't need to know all the information we throw at them. They just want to be happy and have a good cup of coffee and treat it as if they're being valued as a customer. So I'm bringing this back up to show you, here's all these intangible elements that make up a brand. And I want to highlight a few of them. These are the ones that baristas actually have some sort of impact on. All of the other ones are likely out of your hands as a barista. But taste, of course, whether you can pull a shot or brew a cup of coffee, is of course important. Service and hospitality I have separate. So usually I feel like in the industry we talk about service as being the whole experience. But I'll talk a little bit later about where this came from, but service is more, the way I'm defining it here, is the technical delivery of something. So it's like how quickly you can make the coffee, how cleanly you work. Are you handing me a cup that has, milk spilled over the edge? Are there dirty dishes on the tables? Like, to me, this is all service, like just the act of kind of serving coffee and cleaning up after it. Hospitality is about how you feel being in that space, how the barista makes me feel. Do I feel welcome? Do I feel valued? Do I feel honored to be a customer? So because craft has been put at kind of the forefront, it's usually given more value than it is service. I feel like a lot of baristas, if you go into Barista Hustle or any of the online forums, people are arguing over the most mundane aspects of craft. They're talking about, water buildups. They're talking about TDS numbers. They're talking about, sifting or not sifting and grind size. And all of this is important to a certain amount, but not as much as I think we put the emphasis on it. And so because of that, what happens is service suffers. And that's bad because, as much as I hate to say it, all of you are replaceable. Maybe not yet, but in the future. So all of this emphasis on grind particle size and water buildup and using scales for espresso, it's all of this science is fantastic, but it's laying the groundwork for new technology. And this new technology is going to be able to replace making delicious coffee, and it's going to be able to do it so much more consistently than humans are, and that will be a problem if you don't realize the other part of the value that as a barista you contribute. And that is providing great hospitality and making people happy when you serve them coffee. This right here is from a New York startup. It's called the Pour Steady. And it's still sort of in beta testing mode. And so I think there's still, it has technical glitches like technology will. But I've had coffee from it, and it makes damn good pour-overs. And I would be more than happy to have this on a bar if it worked fantastic all the time. And I think more and more technology is going to keep coming out. But I don't think it's a bad thing, because what that means is if I can make 4 pour-overs at a time without having to stand there dropping water over it, that means I can use my time to greet customers, to clear tables, to make sure that everybody is happy. And by making people happy, it means that they're going to come back the next day and the next day to buy more coffee. And so ultimately, as a barista, I'm much more valuable if I can get people to come back the next day than I am just standing there pouring water over coffee grounds. So during my master's, I interviewed a bunch of people, and one of the people I interviewed is Kyle Glanville, who I've always admired ever since meeting first during Coffee Common. And we were talking about service, and one of the things he said is that employees in specialty coffee have failed spectacularly. And he meant this in the context of meeting people where they are. In specialty coffee, we have this kind of need to want everyone to be purists like we are. And if they're not drinking it black and they're not enjoying it the way we think they should enjoy it, however that may be, that they're not worthy enough of drinking it. And I feel like this has changed. It's gotten a little better in the last couple of years, but there's a stigma that's kind of remained because of it. And what Kyle meant by this is that we haven't really addressed the needs of people. And he said, if someone comes into my shop and they order something that isn't black coffee, you can either make them feel like shit and they'll never come back into your cafe again, or you can give them what they ordered, make sure they come back, and when you see them on their second or third or fourth time and they're regular, you just slide them a small taster of a black Kenyan that you just brewed and said, hey, I know you like milk in your coffee, but just give this a taste. And you meet them where they are and you make them happy. And by doing that, you will have future opportunities to introduce them to something more into your liking, something that they may like more as well. But what you're not doing is alienating them and making sure that they don't ever come back. If someone comes into your cafe and they feel like they're unwanted or that they're stupid or any of these things, you will likely never see them again. And that will not make your employers happy. It's not good for the brand. It's not good for what they will tell their friends about your brand. So, and even in coffee, I feel like if you take yourself outside, some of us sometimes will find ourselves in a bubble. Like I'll go to cafes where I know the baristas and I know what I'm getting. And I'm not a normal customer in that setting. But there are times where I do go to a cafe, whether it's in a new city, and I just want to experience how other customers experience things. I actually enjoy that much more. And there's one cafe in Washington, D.C., where my brother works that I used to go to a lot. I would go into work with him, and I would sit there and read or do work. And they had good coffee, multi-roaster bar, and it was a great shop. I would recommend it to people. And then one day, a friend of mine likes specialty coffee, but he wears a suit to work, doesn't feel very comfortable in most coffee bars because he doesn't know much about it. He was like, hey, let's go have coffee at that place, that you always visit. And, you can show me what to order. Like, he's like, I don't know what to order. When I go in this place, he's like, but every time you make coffee or you send me coffee, I always like it. So we go into this coffee shop that I've been to a dozen times, and I order a pour over of a Kenya that was on the menu. And the barista, looking deadpan at me, says, we don't do pour over here, we do hand pour. And I thought my head was going to explode. Not only because I know what they were saying was total bullshit and meant nothing, but the fact that they kind of made me feel like an idiot when I knew that I wasn't wrong. And the thing is that I took the coffee, ordered it, had it, and it was delicious. It was a very good coffee. But I have never been back to that coffee shop, and that barista single-handedly destroyed my perception of that company. And that's how sensitive it can be. And I don't think I'm overreacting. I think that's a realistic representation of most customers. If a customer gets treated like that, there are coffee shops all over every city that we live in. And if they feel like shit when they leave, they will find a new place to go and a new place to spend their money. And so the thing is, with that barista, she could have been having a terrible day. She could have been a new barista. She hadn't been fully trained. She didn't fully understand what the mission of the company was. But the thing is as a barista or working in hospitality, you are an actor on a stage. Like, everything in your cafe is a prop. It's an element of the performance. And you should think of yourself that way. I personally do not enjoy service that much. But I know that I'm not the type of person who should be a barista. But when my company does events, we don't have a cafe yet, but when we do events, we have coffee bars set up. I put on a persona, and I want to make people feel great, and I want them to be happy with their coffee. And no matter how I'm feeling, how hungover I am, how tired I am, like whatever it is, like that's your job. You put on that persona and you make people feel good. And if you don't, you end up furthering the stereotype of the hipster barista. So I'm sure you've all heard the term hipster barista, hipster coffee, like hipster whatever, and it probably annoys every single one of us. We don't want the stereotype to persist and keep perpetuating itself. But from my own personal experiences, there are reasons why this exists. People don't want to feel stupid when they're getting their coffee. And if they do, it will affect the brand of your company. As a barista, you have the opportunity to make a person's day or ruin it. And the TDS of your brew has very little to do with it. I keep reiterating this, and it's not because I don't think the quality of your coffee matters. I do. I think the quality of your coffee matters a lot. But I think where you as a barista put the emphasis on it is what's important. If you are so focused on your pour over or pouring your latte art or checking the TDS or messing with your grinder, and meanwhile you've got a line of people backing up, you've got people waiting 20 minutes for their drinks, the difference in taste of that coffee will not matter as much as how those people feel because of all the other things that you're ignoring. If somebody gets a delicious cup of coffee, but every other aspect of that experience was terrible, they're going to remember that terrible stuff and not how good the cup of coffee was. If they have an okay cup of coffee, but you made them feel fantastic, like they will come back. And it sucks for us as purists who want every single shot to be a God shot and every cup to be perfectly brewed and perfect TDS. But when you're serving hundreds of people a day, the reality is you just want to make them happy. And most people, as I said before, not that they don't necessarily know, but don't necessarily care if there's a slight fluctuation or variation in the quality. How many of you guys have listened to the Coffee Jobs podcast that James Hoffman is doing? Not enough people. You should all be listening to it. It's fantastic. One of the few podcasts that I actually listen to. But what he's doing is he has been interviewing lots of people who hire in the industry. He's talked to Ann Linnell at Kopi and Klaus Thompson at Coffee Collective and Michaela, their HR director, Charles Babinski at G&B, all of these people, Michael Phillips at Blue Bottle, and asked them what they're looking for when they hire baristas. What's important to them? What matters most? These three words are the ones that have come up most consistently, and it's kindness, personality, and empathy, which all make you very good at hospitality and might not make you good at making coffee. But the thing is they're all aware and understand that they can teach you to make coffee. They can teach you to make better coffee, but these things are much harder to teach. And actually, a lot of them even said that if you put on your resume or you put in your cover letter like specifics about your abilities and skill, like, oh, like I'm really good with dialing in just 2 shots, or if you're really, really scientific and really, really geeky about your technical skills as a barista, most of them said that turns them off, and it's not what they're looking for. They want someone who can show that they will be really good with people and that they will engage well with their customers, and they will be able to encourage them to come back day after day. So you guys should all listen to that podcast. So this goes back also when I was interviewing James along with Kyle, and he says, we were talking about service and what's important, and he said, if you can go somewhere that reliably makes your day better, why would you not go every day? And again, he was just emphasizing the importance of how you feel when you visit a coffee shop and how little it has to do with the very specific, technical, geeky, nerdy aspects of the quality of your coffee. How many of you guys have read this book or are at least familiar with it, or it's on your to-read list? About half the room. It's a very interesting, scientific, technical book about how water impacts coffee. As a barista, I think knowing how water impacts coffee, or just simply that water impacts the taste of coffee, is very, very important. But unless you as a barista are able to control the type of water system that your coffee bar uses, this book is useless for you. Unless you are making your water for every pour over that you do, or you have direct control of your water system, most of the information in this book is not going to help you day to day on the bar. And no offense to Christopher Hinden, but I just think that's the reality of it. This book, how many of you guys have read this book or heard of it? A few of you. This book would help you so much more as a barista, and it has nothing to do with coffee. It's called Setting the Table. It's by Danny Meyer. Danny Meyer is the owner of lots of restaurants in New York. A couple of them are Michelin star. One is 3 Michelin star. 11 Madison Park has a great coffee program. Founder of the Shake Shack chain. Has over 25, I think he has 28 James Beard Awards, which are like an American food award. It's kind of like the Grammys for food awards. He knows a thing or two about restaurants. And he knows a thing or two about hospitality and how important it is to making people happy and bringing them in time and time again and being successful in the food industry. So I just wanted to leave you with this quote of his. He says, "Food is secondary to something that matters even more." And this is coming from a guy who has several Michelin star restaurants, and he's saying that food is secondary, which I think is kind of amazing because you are spending a lot of money to go to these restaurants to eat the food. But the thing is while you're eating the food, there's so much other stuff going on that is subconsciously impacting your experience. And I've been to restaurants that have good food and bad experiences, and I've had ones that have everything on point. And the ones that have everything on point are much more memorable, and they're the ones that I want to go back to. It says, in the end, what's most meaningful is creating positive, uplifting outcomes for human experiences and relationships. Business, like life, is how you make people feel. And as I said before, how somebody feels about your brand will determine whether they continue to be a customer and whether they come back. And for your employer, they've worked really, really hard to build this company and to create this entity that you are now like on the front lines of. Like you are the sole representation of that company in some instances. And it's really important that you understand that role and that impact and how it's not just about the coffee that you serve in the cup, but it's how you make that person feel during the whole interaction. So thank you for listening, and